Sham Sharadava Nalalida Loka Tranaya Karuna Ghana Ganatam Sharada Nalalida Loka Tranaya Karuna Ghana Ganatam Praptasya Kalyana Gunanavasya Vande Gurashi Charanaravrindam Praptasya Kalyana Gunanavasya Vande Gurashi Charanaravrindam 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 Mahaprabhu ki Tananita Gita Vaditra Madhyam Manasurasena Mahaprabhu ki Tananita Gita Vaditra Madhyam Manasurasena Romanchakam Pasru Taranga Bhajo Vande Gurashi Charanaravrindam Shri Vigrahara Dhana Nityanana Shingaratanama Niramajanado Dhana Nityanana Shingaratanama Juktasya Bhaktamsya Niyunjatopi Vande Gurashi Charanaravrindam Chaturvidhashi Bhagavat Prasada Satana Triptan Hari Bhakta Shangam Kridvaiva tripte bhajata shadeva Vande Gurashi Charanaravrindam Shiradikama Bhavayara Para Madhura Leela Gunarupanamna Shiradikama Bhavayara Madhura Leela Pratikshana Swa Dhanalalupasya Vande Gurashi Charanaravrindam Vande Gurashi Ne kunjayono ratikeri siddhai Jajali virjukti apekshaneya Ne kunjayono ratikeri siddhai Jajali virjukti apekshaneya Tatrati dakya atibalabhasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda. Sakshat Haritena Shamasta Shastri Uktastathava Bhateva Sadhave. Kintu Prabhoja Priya Eva Tasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda. Yasya Prasada Bhagavat Prasada. Yasya Prasada Nagati Kutapi. Yasya Prasada Bhagavat Prasada. Jayam stuvam tasya yashastri sandhyam Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda. Jayam stuvam tasya yashastri sandhyam Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunavadi Pachata Deshatarine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunavadi Pachata Deshatarine. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Shri Chaitanya Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Shri Chaitanya Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hariyaraye Namah Krishna Jadavaye Namah, Jadavaye Madhavaye Kesavaye Namah, Gopal Govindara Shimadhusudan, Giridhari Gopinath Madana Mohan, Shri Chaitanya Nityananda Shri Advaita Sita, Hari Guru Vaishnava Bhagavata Gita, Shri Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghuna, Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasara Guna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Shri Radha Nila Madhav, Radha Nila Madhav, Radhe Radha. Jayo Jagannatha Jayo Baladeva Jayo Subhadrama Jayo Sudarshan Chakra. Jayo Sitaram Jayo Sitaram Sitaram Jayo Lakshman Hanuman. Nitai Gaura Haribo 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo 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 Nitai Gaura Pramanande Haribo. Jai Om Vishnupada Param Saprabhajakacharya Astutar Sarashishimat Iskon Pratishta Vibhiti Samstapakacharya Vaishnav Siramani Gaura Priyajana Krishna Prema Bhakti Datta Patita Pavana. His Divine Grace Abhacharavina Bhakti Vedanta Swamara Shira Prabhupada Ji Ki Jai. Shri Gaurya Guru Varga Patiti Udhar Ki Jai. Shri Rup Sanatanam Bhatra Gunath Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Guna Sat Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai. Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ji Ki Jai. Jayananta Koti Vaishnav Vrind Ki Jai. Prem Si Kaho Si Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrind Ki Jai. Jai Param Dayal Shri Nityananda Prabhu Ki Jai. Prema Nam Sankirtane Ka Janaka Prema Purushottama Shri Sachinandana Shriman Gauranga Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Gaur Hari Mahavaranavatari Ki Jai. Golokira Pramadhan Hari Nam Sankirtan Yaga Ki Jai. Jugadharma Hare Krishna Mahamantra Ki Jai. Brihat Midanga Translator Book Distribution Seva Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopina Radha Kun Samakun Giriraj Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Brajabhum Vrindavan Mathur Dham Ki Jai. Their Lordship Shri Shri Radha Nilamadhava Ki Jai. Shri Maya Purnavadip Eka Chakra Dham Ki Jai. Paramakuruna Shri Gaur Nitai Ki Jai. Shri Purushottama Ketra Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Shri Shri Jagannatha Swami Baladev Prabhu Smas Bhadradevi Sudarshan Chakra Bhagavan Ki Jai. Bhakti Sarva Vigna Vinashana Kanishingare Bhagavan Ki. Jaganga Mai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai. Tulsi Maharani Brinde Devi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Bolo Shri Maturadharani Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhakta Vindi Ki Jai. Nitai Gauri Pramanande Haribo. All glory to the Assembly Bodies. All glory to the Assembly Bodies. All glory to the Assembly Bodies. All glories, all glories, all glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gaura.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Praglada Lada Dayine. Hiranyakashipur Vakshaha.
Hiranyakashipur Vakshaha.
Shilantankarnakalaye.
Jaya Sila Tanka Nakalaye
Ito Narsimha Parato Narsimha
Ito Nisinga Parato Nisinga
Yato Yato Yami Tato Narsimha
Jaya Jato Jato Jami Tato Nisinga
Bahir Narsimha Hidaye Narsimha
Bhayir Nisinga Hridaye Nisinga
Narasimha Madim Saranam Prapate
Narasingha Madim Sharanam Prapate
Tava Kara Kamala Bare Nakam Abhuta Singam Dalita Hiranyakashipo Tanubringa Keshavadita Narari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Tavakara Kamala Bare Nakam Abhuta Singam Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanubringa Kesavadita Narari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jayo Keshavadita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare
Jai
Kesavadita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jayo Narasimha Dev Jayo Narasimha Dev Jayo Narasimha Dev Jayo Narasimha Dev
Jaya Nisingare Jaya Nisingare Jaya Nisingare Jaya Nisingare
Jayo Prahlad Maharaj Jayo Prahlad Maharaj Jayo Prahlad Maharaj Jayo Prahlad Maharaj
Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj
Nitya Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitya Gaura Hari Bol
Nitya Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitya Gaura Hari Bol Bhakti Pada Sarvigna Vinashana Krishingare Bhagavan ki jai Jai Bhakta Shrestha Prahlad Maharaj ki Gaura Hari Pramanande Vai Priyaye ke Sava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Shrutavatai Namo Namaha Vrindayai Tulasi Vai Priyaye ke Sava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Shrutavatai Namo Namaha Vrindayai Tulasi Devai Priyayai Kesava Satya Krishna Bhakti Prade Devi Shatavatai Namo Namaha. Vishmati Tulasi Maharani Vrindadevi ki. What are you singing? Come. Yeah. You can start now.
Namo Namaha Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha
Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha.
Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha
Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha.
Radha Krishna Seva Pavo Iya Vilasi
Radha Krishna Seva Pava Eya Vilasi.
Radha Krishna Seva Pavo Iya Vilasi
Radha Krishna Seva Pava Eya Vilasi.
Ye tumhara sharanalo Taravancha purna ho
Je tomara sharanala Taravancha purna.
Kripa kori koro tare Vrindavanavasi
Tumi kripa kari kara tare Vrindavanavasi.
Moraye Abilas Vilas kunje diovas
Moraya Vila Vilasa Kunje Dioba.
Nayana Haribo Sada Yugala Ruparasi
Aminayane Rivo Sada Jugala Ruparasi.
Ini Vedana Dara Sakiranugata Koro
Eni Vedanadhara Sakirayano Gatakara.
Sevadhikara Diye Koro Nijadasi
Sebayadi Kara Diye Koroni Jadasi.
Dina Krishna Dasi Koi Ye Namora Ho
Dina Krishna Das Koi Namora.
Sri Radha Govinda Pere Sada Ye Nabasi
Shri Radha Govinda Preme Sadaye Nabasi.
Sri Radha Govinda Preme Sadaye Nabasi
Shri Radha Govinda Preme Sadaye Nabasi.
Yani Kani Cha Papnani Brahma Jati Gani Cha Kani Tani Pranya Shanti Pradakshina Pade Pade
Yani Kani Sapapani Brahma Tari Kani Sa Tani Tani Prana Santi Pradakshina Pade Pade.
Yani Kani च पाप्नानि ब्रह्माद्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्राण्य शान्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे
यानि सपापानि ब्रह्माटरिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे
यानि कानि च पाप्नानि ब्रह्माद्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्राण्य शान्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे
यानि सपापानि ब्रह्माटरिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare,
Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama.
Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani.
Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani.
Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi.
Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi.
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura. Shri Vrindai Tulasi Devai Priyaya Ke Sava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prari Devi Sattavataye Namo Namah. Vrindai Tulasi Devai Priyaya Ke Sava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prari Devi Sattavataye Namo Namah. Vrindayai Tulasi Devai Priyayai Kesava Satya Krishna Bhakti Prade Devi Shattavatai Namo Namaha. Jai Shrimati Tulasi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. O Tulasi, beloved of Krishna, I bow before you again and again. My desire is to obtain the service of Shri Radha and Krishna. Whoever takes shelter of you as wishes fulfilled, bestow your mercy upon him, you make him resident of Vrindavana. My desire is that you also grant me a residence in pleasure groves of Shri Vrindavan Dham. Thus, within my vision, I will always be wholly beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna. I beg you to make me a follower with them of Raj. Please give me the privilege of devotional service and make me your own maid servant. This very fallen and lowly servant Krishna praise. May I always swim in love with Shri Radha and Govinda. Shri Mati Tulsi Maharani Vrindi Devi ki jai. So there are 10 offenses in matter of chanting the holy name of the Lord that should be avoided. They are as follows. 1. To blaspheme the devotees who dedicate their life for propagating the holy name of the Lord. 2. To consider names of demigods, the Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma, to be equal to or independent of the name of Lord Vishnu. 3. To disobey the orders of the spiritual mass. 4. To blaspheme the very scriptures of the sons of Vedic version. 5. To consider the glory of chanting Hare Krishna to be imagination. 6. To give some interpretation to the holy name of the Lord. 7. To commit sinful activities in the strength of chanting the holy name. 8. To consider the chanting Hare Krishna as one of the auspicious ritualistic activities offered in Vedas as fruitive activities, karma kanda. 9. To instruct the fearless person about the glories of the holy name. And 10. To not have complete faith in chanting the holy names and to maintain material attachments, even after understanding so many instructions on this matter. It also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be Vaishnava must carefully guard against these 10 offenses in order to quickly achieve the desired success, Krishna Prema. Now let us offer our most humble obeisances unto all the Vaishnavas, devotees of the Lord. They are just like desired trees that can fulfill the desires of everyone, and they are full of compassion for the fallen, conditioned souls. Jaivancha kalpatarubhascha kripa sindhu vyaivacha patitanam pavanibhyo Vaishnavibhyo namo namo Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki jai. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Sikhastakam ki jai. Chaito Darpanamajanam Bhamadavagni Vapanam Sheyakari Vachandika Vitarnam Vidyavadhu Jivanam Anandam Bhudivardhanam Pratiparam Purnamrita Swadanam Sarvatmasnam Param Paravijayati Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakari Baudhani Sarva Shaktis Tatrapita Niyamita Shmarane Nakala Ita Drushitava Kripaya Bhagavan Mamapi Dhurdhaivam Iti Shamiya Janina Nuraga Trinadapi Sunichena Tarorapi Saishnuna Amanina Dena Kirtaniya Sadari Na dhanam na janam na sundarim Kavitam vajagarishaka maye Mama janmani janmanishwari Bhavata bhakti raitu tvai Ainandattanuja kinkaram Patitam mam vishame bhavambudo Kripaya tava pada pankaja Stitha tuli sadisham vichintaya Nayanam galora shrudharaya Vadanam gata gadarudaya gira Pulake nichitam vapukada Tava nama grahane bhavisati Jugaitam nimishena Chakyusha prarusaitam Sunyaitam jagata sarvam Govinda virahiname Asli shabapa daratam pinastumam Adarshnar marmahatam karotuva Jatha tathava vidadhatu lampato Matrana tastu saivana para Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Sikhastakam ki jai. Namo Mahavaranayo Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnayo Krishna Chaitanya Namine Gaura Tvishe Namo Vishnu Paraya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Shmate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devam Gauravane Pracharine Nivishesha Sunavadi Pachatyari Satarine Glory to the Sri Krishna Sankirtana, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years and extinguishes the fire of conditioned life for repeated birth and death. This Sankirtana moment is the prime benediction for humanity at large, because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss and enables us to fully test the nectar for which we're always anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings, and thus you have hundreds and millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names, you have invested all your transcendental energies. There are not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness, you enable us to easily approach you by your holy names, but I'm so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself a lower than straw in the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your causeless devotional service, birth after birth. O son of Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor, yet some or other I have fallen in this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. O my Lord, when will my eyes be decorated with tears of love, flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? When will my voice choke up, and will the hairs of my body stand on the end of the recitation of your name? O Govinda, feeling your separation, I am considering moments to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I'm feeling all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna is my Lord, and it should remain so. Even if sunders me rightfully by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me, he is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipful Lord, unconditionally. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Sikyastakam Ki Jai. Shri Guru Vandan Mangal Charan Ki Jai. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manovistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Karamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Bandeham Shri Guru Shri Jyotaparakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatha Vintam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitam Cha Nama Om Vishnu Padayo Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanto Swamine Tinamine Namaste Saraswati Devim Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Sunyavari Pasatyari Satarine Nama Om Vishnu Padayo Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Iti Namine Shri Varshabhana Videvi Deitaya Kripabdaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Daine Prabhavi Nama Madhurjala Primadhya Shri Rupanuga Bhaktida Shri Gaura Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namastute Namaste Gauravane Shimurtaye Rinatarine Rupanuga Viruddha Pusidanta Dvantarine Namagora Kishoraya Sakchavera Gyamurtaye Vipralambhara Sambodhe Paramujayate Namaha Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Satchit Anandanamine Gora Shakti Swarupaya Rupanuga Varayate Gaura Virbhava Bhumetsvam Nirdesha Sajana Priya Vaishnava Sarvabhuma Sri Jagannathayate Namaha Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Paritanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavaranayo Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnayo Krishna Chaitanya Namine Gauratvishe Namaha Panchatattamakam Krishna Bhakta Rupa Swarupakam Bhaktavataro Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakta Shaktikam He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Jayatam Suratopangor Mama Mandamatirgatir Masarvasya Padamhojo Radha Madanamohanam Divyarvindaranya Kalpaduma Shmara Nagara Shingasanastu Shmaradha Shila Govinda Devo Pristali Visheva Manushmarami Shmara Sara Sarambe Bamshvata Tatastita Karshan Venu Swanar Gopir Gopinata Shri Estuna Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhi Vrindavaneshwari Vrusabhano Suti Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jai Shri Guru Pranam Guru Vandan Ki Jai Guru Pramanande Hari Hari
Srimad Bhagavatam Grantaraj Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we're continuing our children's lectures every Saturday and Sunday. And the homework is explain what is the genesis of the false ego. So yesterday we heard about 5 devotees, kids that gave, that read their essay. There are 2 more today. They're not here yet. They'll be coming soon, I think. So I'm going to make a little bit of a summary explanation of the genesis of the false ego. Now, this is a very important subject because everybody has a false ego. And if there's something false, it means there's something real also. So there's a real ego and the false ego. But everyone in the material world has the false ego, and because of that, they unnecessarily suffer. So it's a very important subject to be, let's say, educated in, because otherwise we can go through our whole life with the false ego that puts us always in difficulties, and is a major obstacle to Krishna consciousness. So the genesis of it is explained in the 2nd chapter, 62nd and 63rd verse of Bhagavad Gita. Dahayato vishayam pumsa sangate subhajayate sangat sanjayate kama kama krodha vajayate krodhat bhavati samahas samahat smriti ridmama buddhinasat smriti ridmama vibrama smriti brahmsat buddhina so buddhinasat pranasyati. So these are 2 verses that are very significant if we want to understand the genesis or the beginning of the false ego. And it says, while contemplating objects of the senses, one may develop attachment. And when attachment increases, one becomes full of what you would call lust. And when lust is frustrated, there's anger. And when there's anger, and especially when it increases, we become delusional. Now, what does this word delusional mean? It's very important to understand. It's first anger, and then when anger is frustrated, one becomes illusioned. That means we begin to believe things that were never true. Number one thing is, I am this body. It never was true that I am this body, because the body is always changing. And we could ask the question, well, if you say you are this body, which body are you talking about? The body in the womb of your mother, the body when you were pushed out as a little baby, the body you had at 6 years old, at 16 years old, 26 years old, 56 years old, 86 years old, or the body that died. Which body are you talking about? So we cannot say, I am this body, because body is always changing. It actually changes dramatically every day. And eventually you see those changes in a much more clear way as you get older. So, therefore, at no time in the past, the present, or the future am I this body. But yet people believe they are this body. So that is the number one illusion of life. From that illusion, if one acts on the basis of I am this body, they're acting in a state of delusion. So look up the word delusion. There's a slight difference between illusion and delusion. And this, again, you have to learn good English to understand these things. Most people, especially Indians, although they speak English, they don't understand English. There are some Indians that are very good in English, but most of the people that speak English from India do not actually understand the language. Therefore, they make mistakes. Just like yesterday, one of the girls was reading her essay, and instead of saying minute, she said minute. So we see how easy it is to make mistakes in English. Go ahead. What does delusion say?
Maharaj, believing things that are not true.
Okay, now look up sit down. Look up the definition of illusion. ILL. Yeah, go ahead.
A thing that is or is likely to be wrongly perceived or interpreted by the senses.
Okay, so there's mistake, there's illusion, and there's delusion. You have to understand these three things. The first thing is a mistake. A mistake is you see something, but you don't understand what it actually is, and you think it's something else than what it actually is. Then, when you think something is different than what it actually is, and you're convinced of that, that's called an illusion. And when you act on the illusion, that's called delusion. So you have mistake, illusion, and delusion. So it says, while contemplating the objects of senses, one develops attachment for them. When attachment increases, one develops lust. When lust is frustrated, there's anger. And when one becomes angry, they become delusional. They start acting in ways that are based on a mistake that turned into illusion, and now acting on that illusory concept, one becomes delusional. And then, when one acts in delusion, there is bewilderment of memory. They forget what is right, what is wrong, who I am, what is the real goal of life, and their memory becomes you would say it becomes compromised. And then when the memory becomes compromised like that, or bewildered, then one loses their intelligence. intelligence becomes destroyed, in a sense. They can know. Now, what's the difference between the intelligence and the mind? The mind is the sixth sense. There are eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, and the sixth sense is the mind. But the mind receives the impressions of the other five senses, puts them in memory to a certain degree, and quickly makes a decision. I like this or I don't like it. The intelligence is deliberative. That means it can carefully analyze something, as opposed to the mind's quick decision of this is nice or this is not nice, or this is good or this is bad, or I like this or I don't like this. And the intelligence can think much more deeply about something, and if the intelligence is clear, usually it can make the right decision, whereas the mind can, because of its quick decision making, often makes mistakes. Then when the intelligence is lost, then one falls down into the whirlpool of material life. Now, what does that mean? That one falls down, meaning they violate all the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness, and they become trapped by the birth, death, old age, and disease, by the three modes of material nature, by the three kinds of misery, by time, and by lust, anger, greed, madness, illusion, and envy. All these things happen in this, what you would call, cascade of falsity that one falls into. And it all begins by not seeing things correctly. Dahayato vishayam pumsa, the first line of verse 62. What does that say? It says, while contemplating the objects of the senses. So one sees something, but they make a mistake and misinterpret what it is, or project from themselves onto that thing they're seeing something that it's not, but something that they fancied it should be. And in this way, this whole process begins. It begins by not seeing correctly. Now, what is the basis of not seeing correctly? Modern false education. The whole educational system is false. It's teaching many, many things that are not true. So, what is one of the number one things that kids and people are taught that is not true? That is the concept of proprietorship. Every society in the world is based on a principle of proprietorship. Therefore, communism is based on a principle of proprietorship that the people are the proprietors, not the government, not the military, not the capitalists. Okay. And now, secondly, socialism. Socialism says the state is the proprietor. So all the laws in communism would protect the proprietorship of the individuals. All the laws, or most of the laws in socialism, protect the proprietorship of the government. The government takes over banks, the government takes over personal property, almost everything. Right? Now, number three, capitalism. Capitalism, the principle of proprietorship is that the individual has the right to own proprietorship. Now, the difference between communism and capitalism is the collective people altogether are proprietors, whereas in capitalism, the individual is the proprietor. See? And then in fascism, the dictator and his military cronies and maybe sometimes industrialists are the proprietors, not the people. And then in monarchy, the king and the nobles are the proprietors. Then in anarchy, nobody is the proprietor. Every one of these concepts of proprietorship are wrong. Therefore, people that live in those countries that are following one or the other of this concept, false concepts of proprietorship, none of those people are ever really happy because they become trapped by the laws of material nature. They're violating the laws of material nature. What is the ultimate law of material nature? Ishavaisham midam sarvam jatkinja jagatyam jagat tena taktena bunjitaha magritaha kasasvidanam. Ishopanishad, first mantra. The Supreme Lord is perfect, is the supreme proprietor of everything material and spiritual. And he has set aside for every living entity. That means there are the aquatics, there are the plants, there are the reptiles and bugs, there are birds, there are mammals, there are human beings and devatas. This mantra 1 says that Krishna, the Supreme Personality Godhead, has set aside for everyone their minimum needs. Whether you work or you don't work, whether you have money or you don't have money, God has set aside for everyone, all those different categories of living entities, including human beings, their minimum needs. Now we see that. We go out and feed homeless people. They don't have much money. Oftentimes they don't have a home, but yet they're being fed every day, you see. So this is arranged by God, whether it's our food truck or whether it's a church or whether it's another organization. Like there's another organization, they do food distribution illegally, but they do it. And it says, food, not bombs. Have you ever heard of them? Food, not bombs. You ever hear? Look it up. Food, not bombs. You learn something new every day. They're in Seattle. They're all over the United States. And they don't do it legally. They just go out with cars or trucks and feed people. Right.
There's a website called SeattleFoodNotBombs.org.
You see? Every city has a Food Not Bombs organization.
Saturday and Sunday.
What? Well, I mean, they might do Saturday, Sunday, or they might do every day. It doesn't matter. You know, it depends how organized they are. Okay.
Free food for all, hot meat.
Yeah, they don't. They said food, not bombs. So they don't want to make bombs and bullets and things like that. They want to make food and distribute it to the people. They say. Okay, so now we see that when we have a false concept of proprietorship, and there are many false concepts of proprietorship, and those concepts of proprietorship are the basis of the society. The society is organized based on that concept of proprietorship. So you have, and then there's hybrids. A hybrid would be like the United States. The United States claims to be a capitalist country, but ever since, especially the 1930s, it has mixed into the capitalism a lot of socialism. So you have, it actually it happened earlier in the early 19th century, the 20th century. They passed the laws of income tax. Income tax is not a principle of capitalism. Capitalism is, everybody is on their own, right? If somebody is rich, that's because he worked hard to be rich, or he has good karma or whatever. And if someone is poor, it's their own fault, right? When they passed the law, I think it was 1912 or 13, they made the law of income tax. They wanted to equalize somewhat the distribution of money in society, so they started forcing people to pay taxes. Before that, there were some taxes also, but now it became every state had its own concept of how much people should pay taxes. Now it became federally mandated, right? And okay, and then also the government completely took over printing of money. This also happened in the early 20th century, whereas before every state was printing money. It was complete chaos. So, or at least there were many states printing money. So here we see two things that happened in the beginning of the 20th century that introduced a mix now of capitalism and socialism. When you get to the 1930s, it became big-time socialism under Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his wife. They passed many laws that were all socialistic because they were afraid the country was going to turn into a communist country. The communists were very, very, very active in the 1930s, trying to convince Americans to switch to communism. So they introduced these things because there was a major drought, there was a major collapse of farming in the Midwest because of wildcat farming. I'm not going to explain what that means, but a lot of bad things happened it started in 1928 with the collapse of the stock market, and then it got really bad 1931, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. The only thing that saved the United States was war. World War II, that saved the United States, because then the government declared war, what you would call emergency, and they eliminated many freedoms of the American people, forcing people to go into the army, forcing factories to stop manufacturing their goods and just manufacture armaments. And they put the Japanese in jail, in concentration camps. They also were going to do that with people of German, ancestry, but they stopped. They just put the Japanese in concentration camps, and most of them were in California and the West. And they did a whole bunch of things that are illegal according to the Constitution, but because there was a severe war, they declared war emergency and then canceled many freedoms of Americans. Right? You don't know all this, but I'm explaining it to you, right? Or you may know it. I'm not sure. I don't know, but this is part of American history. Just like they also did the same thing to the American Indians. They basically destroyed their culture and put them into what you could call them like prison camps. They gave them certain bad areas where they could live and be forced to live there, and they had to give up their nomadic form of life. And to do that, they purposely killed almost all the buffaloes in the West, because the Indians, most Indians, the biggest tribes were in the West, or most of the tribes were in the West, and they were nomadic. They would go from place to place following the buffaloes, and they would kill one or two buffaloes, and they would eat them, and use their skin to make tents, and so forth. So their culture was nomadic culture based on the buffalo. So what the United States Army do, and they paid people to do it, they just would go out and kill all the buffaloes. And they had to, rejuvenate the herds of buffaloes. But that only started recently. They wiped them out completely, and in the same way they wiped out the whole culture of the American Indians. At least the ones in the West. In the East, they did the same thing, but it was a little less violent, let's say. But it was also the same thing. They're forcing them to live on certain bad lands, and they had to. They couldn't come out of those bad lands, right? Okay. So there are hybrids of capitalism. There are hybrids of communism. The communists also, like in Russia, they realized it's not, the program is not working. So they introduced some capitalistic ideas, whereas before it was supposed to be pure communism. But they never really reached that stage of pure communism. And then the Chinese also, they introduced recently, maybe 20 years ago, capitalistic principles. Still, they have complete control, but they let people own proprietorship. Before, you were not allowed to own anything in the communist state. They would give you things like food and education and health care and a place to live, but they forced you to live in these horrible high-rise apartments. And people were, but on the other hand, they gave them some benefits, some social benefits, but they were not allowed to have a business. No one was allowed to have a business. Right? Eventually, they realized it's not working. They seized all the farms also, and then forced people to work on their golchoz, which means a state farm. And the whole farming, let's say, occupation collapsed. After 30, 40 years of communist control, it collapsed. They had to import food from the United States. Otherwise, they were not able to feed their people anymore, because the farming of, taking away the individual farming owners and forcing them to work on cooperatives under the control of the state, it didn't work, because people would be fed whether they worked or not, or whether they work really slow. Someone works real fast, but then the guys that used to work fast, they stopped working fast. They said, why should I work fast? Because they're going to feed me anyway. And they're going to give me a place to sleep, and I get some free Medicare, not very good Medicare, but at least it's free, and I can get free education also. So why should I work hard, right? So the whole system collapsed, right? By the 1980s, the whole system collapsed, and then the Soviet Union broke up into separate countries. Okay, so the whole point is that the concept of proprietorship determines how the country is going to be governed, right? And I went through the main 7 or 8 concepts of proprietorship that organizes countries. And then there are hybrids of them. Okay, so every one of those concepts is wrong. That's why the people in all those different countries under those different concepts of proprietorship are never really happy. And there's oftentimes breakdowns of those societies, and there's war, and all kinds of things happen because they're following a false concept. So then what is the real concept of proprietorship? The real concept of proprietorship is everything belongs to Krishna, right? Bhoktaram yagitapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram sridam sarvabhutanam gyatvam santim richati. So that's the 5th chapter, 29th verse, where Krishna says, Bhoktaram yagitapasam, I am the original bhokta, or recipient of all sacrifices. Even if you offer it to Durga Mata, or Shiva, or to Brahma, or to, I don't know, your grandmother, whoever you offer to, ultimately it's meant for Krishna, because he's the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices. And then secondly, Bhoktaram Yagatabasam, Sarvaloka Maheshwaram, he is the proprietor of everything in the spiritual world and in the material world. That means every planet, every country, every piece of land, every property, everything, it all belongs to Krishna. It doesn't belong to us, right? But we think it belongs to us, and that is our illusion, and that is our delusional state. Okay, so if we accept the proprietorship of Krishna, including our own body, because our own body is made of elements that are coming from Krishna: earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego. All these things are coming from Krishna. Ego means your individuality. Well, that means I am a jiva. I have an eternal soul, but my soul is part and parcel of Krishna. Mamaevam sa jiva bhuta, jiva loka sanatana. So, 15th chapter, 7th verse. We are all sanatana, eternal parts and parcels of Krishna. When it says part, you get an understanding of what the word part means, but when it adds on parcel says that not only you're a part of Krishna, but you're an individual part of Krishna, and Krishna himself is also an individual. That's what the word parcel means, right? Now, we always say, well, we're part and parcel of Krishna, but we don't really understand what it means. It means that although we're part of Krishna, just like, for example, you get a piece of paper, right? Let's say 8 by 11 and a half piece of paper, right? And you tear it up. Now you have 2 pieces of paper, right? And then you tear it up. Now you have 4 pieces of paper. And then you tear that up. Now you have 8 pieces of paper. And then you throw them, and now you don't have any paper, right? It's all spread out, right? That never happens with the part and parcel of Krishna. We are always in relationship with Krishna. And we always have an individuality, although it's very small individuality compared to Krishna's gigantic individuality. So, but we're never separated from Krishna. Even in our delusional state, we're not separated from Krishna. He's present in our heart as Paramatma. He's present in every atom of the universe. So we're never separated from Krishna. But we are part and parcel. We are part as well as an individual. So this is called Achintya Beda Abeda Tattva, simultaneously and inconceivably one and different. We're one with Krishna because we're part of Krishna. We've come from Krishna. We belong to Krishna. We're his property. Whatever we have, whether it's our soul or our body, both are the property of Krishna. But we do have one other thing that animals and insects and birds and bees and plants don't have. We have limited free will. Because Krishna has complete free will. Therefore, as a part and parcel of the Lord, we have limited free will. So that limited free will says you can either accept Krishna and his instructions or reject Krishna and his instructions. Both ways you can go. You can go one way and then come back and go the other way also, right? And then you can go back again. So we have limited free will that animals don't have. The animals are dictated to through instinct, which is actually Paramatma telling them what to do. We can refuse to follow Paramatma. Okay, we have that choice. But there are consequences. Anytime you make a decision, there's going to be consequences, either positive or negative, right? Either material or spiritual. So whatever we decide to do something, there's going to be a consequence. So if we don't realize all these things, we are in a delusional state. So I already explained, for the people that came late, the difference between mistake, illusion, and delusion. And we also explained the basic principle on which all societies are constructed or organized. Is based on the concept of proprietorship, right? And every one of the different types of proprietorship concepts that are being practiced today that determines what kind of society they have, they're all wrong. There's only one concept of proprietorship that's correct, and that is that Bhoktaram Yagatavasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. Krishna is the owner, controller, origin of everything, material and spiritual. He is the ultimate proprietor. Okay, so if you construct a society based on the proprietorship of Krishna, then the people will be happy. And we have examples of it. It's not that this is theoretical, it never has been done. No, it's been done many times. Lord Ramachandra was one example of it. Yudhisthira Maharaj, another example of an ideal society in which this concept of proprietorship is that Krishna is the proprietor. Parikshit Maharaj is another example. We can go through a lot of other examples, like Prithu Maharaj. All these examples are given in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And then the Pandavas, right? We mentioned Yudhisthira and Parikshit and so forth. Okay, so there have been examples of ideal proprietorship concept and ideal societies. It's not that it's theoretical, it's never been done. It has been done, and it's been successful. However, today, we don't have any practicing examples except on the microscopic level, like a temple. A temple, we understand, and oh, by the way, it's also part of Indian law that when there's a deity installed properly in a property, the deity is the owner of that property. That law is not in the United States, but there is a law like that in India. So if you establish a deity properly and it's recognized by the government considers the deity the owner of that property. See? That's why when we built our first temple in Mumbai or in Juhu Beach, there was a false cheater who sold that property to ISKCON, but he sold it to 4 or 5 other people also at the same time, secretly. And so there was a big, controversy about who owns the property, right? Because this guy sold it to other people also and got money from them. So this went on for some time. So Prabhupada ordered the devotees to build a temple, but it was basically a stage-like building. I actually was there when they were building it, and they installed a deity. So what did the government do? Because the government was on the side of the cheater. They came, invaded the property in Juhu, tore down the altar. It wasn't like a building, it was just like a stage altar, right? And they didn't destroy the deity because, that would be against the law, right, in India. Of course, the Muslims did it, but, the Hindus will not usually destroy a deity. So then when Prabhupada heard about this, he ordered the devotees not to go to sleep, but to rebuild it. And they did. So the next day, when the police came to throw the devotees out of their property and take over the property, the deity was there, it was being worshipped, and the altar was there. So they couldn't touch him. See? So, the laws in India are a little bit different than the laws in the United States. Okay, so in the United States, they don't consider a deity, but they do consider a corporation to be like a person. That's another issue. But they don't consider the deity to be the owner of something. But we act in a temple like this, that the deity is the owner of this temple. I'm not the owner. Nobody else is the owner. The deity is the owner. And we are only servants of the deity. We don't claim ownership. Now, there have been situations in which some errant devotees, look that word up, E-R-R-A-N-T, considered that they owned the temple and the deity, and they sold. They tried to sell the Hawaiian deity, the temple in Hawaii, and then recently some people tried to sell the New York temple, thinking it was their property. Right? And both of those people were stopped. And so this concept of proprietorship is the basis of societal organization, right? And if you follow the wrong concept, like we're following in the United States or in Russia or Europe, then the people will not be happy. They will not be happy. Okay, so now the genesis of this false ego begins, as for the people that weren't here in the beginning of the class. The beginning of the explanation is the second chapter, 62nd and 63rd verse, that explains where this false ego is coming from, and then many other verses in the Bhagavad Gita give more and more explanation of it. And there are many verses in the Srimad Bhagavatam that give more and more explanation of it. So I just spoke about this because the two people who offered their essays yesterday weren't here. So now you're here. So now I'm going to ask Shrestha to read her essay. So get the microphone. Not for you, for the
He wants to say the meaning of errant.
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 Not Iran. It's not Iran. It's errant.
Errant. Okay, go ahead.
Erring or straying from the proper course or standards. For example, he could never forgive his daughter's errant ways.
Yeah, it means you're acting in a state of misunderstanding, and you make mistakes. So when the person is making constant mistakes, they're called errant. Okay, so give the microphone now. And don't put your lips on the microphone because you'll contaminate it.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
The homework was to study the genesis of false ego and write an essay. And the references given were Bhagavad Gita, 3rd chapter, the last 5 verses.
Speak a little bit louder.
Bhagavad Gita, 15th chapter, 5th verse. And also, you can do independent research in Srimad Bhagavatam. So the origin of the false ego is explained by Srila Prabhupada in the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam, 2nd canto, 5th chapter, 25th verse. The living being is practically the dominating factor over the material elements as the enjoyer, though the background is the Supreme Lord.
Okay, what does that mean? Explain that. When it says the Lord is the background, but the jiva is the purusha, the enjoyer.
So what that means is that it appears as if the living being is dominating over the material elements on his own accord, but actually the Supreme Lord is the one who allows everything to happen.
Right. So this is part of our limited free will. We can act as if we're God for some time, but we'll be defeated. So like Napoleon acted like he was God. You know, Putin is acting like he is God. And Hitler acted like he was God. By the way, if Hitler won the Second World War, he would have been worshipped like God. He was already being worshipped like God by some German people, right? And one Indian guy also. There was an Indian guy, a Bengali guy in Bengal. He became rich by supplying some raw materials to Nazi Germany. He put Hitler's picture on his altar. Right? Because he got rich because of Hitler. He put his picture on his altar and was worshiping him, you know, offering food and doing arti and all that nonsense, right? So if Hitler won the war, he would have been worshipped, and people would be forced to have worshipped him all throughout the world, right? But unfortunately, he lost the war. Stalin also was being worshipped like God in Soviet Union for some time before he started killing everyone. And people were afraid of him. He was like a frightening person. Okay, go ahead.
Factually, save and accept the Lord, no one can be called the enjoyer, but the living entity falsely desires to become the enjoyer. This is the origin of false ego.
Is there anybody here who's falsely desiring to become the enjoyer? Raise your hand. Everybody is. Come on. Go ahead.
When the bewildered living being desires this, the shadow elements are generated by the will of the Lord, and the living entities are allowed to run after them.
Okay,
as
now
after
explain what shadow elements are.
the shadow elements basically describes the Lord's shadow, which is Maya or illusion. So you get covered by illusion, and you're allowed to think as if that you are the enjoyer because you forget your relationship with Krishna.
Yeah, these are all the false concepts that enter into the mind. So when it says the shadow elements, you're not actually seeing the real elements. You're seeing shadows of them. Just like, here's my hand, right? And now, because it's blocking some of the light from this lamp, I see the shadow of my hand on the page of the Bhagavad Gita, right? Now, it looks like my hand. You know, I can see the fingers and I can see them moving, right? Now, is the shadow real? It's real, but it's not the real hand. I mean, there is a shadow there, and no one can deny seeing it, right? But it's not the real hand. It looks like the hand, but it's only a shadow of it. So the elements, they're only seeing shadows of the elements. Now, this is an extra homework for next week. Look up Plato's. I mean, we've done this before a long time ago, about 4 or 5 years ago. Look up the explanation in the Plato's Republic of the illusory shadows that people perceive. So because there was connection between ancient Greece and India. There was a strong connection between the two. So the Greeks borrowed a whole bunch of things from Indian philosophy, from Vedic philosophy. But the farther west you go, the more they get skewed or changed, right? So Plato gave an example of almost the same thing as in the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita that says that the material world is like an upside down shadow of reality, right? So the Plato's narrative of the cave and shadows is very similar in many ways to the explanation of the shadow element, right? Explained in Vedic knowledge. Okay, go ahead. So that's let's say an extra, let's say, benefit if you look up Plato's philosophy of the shadow reality. Go ahead.
So when the bewildered living being desires this, the shadow elements are generated by the will of the Lord, and the living entities are allowed to run after them as after phantasmagoria.
As what? As phantasmagoria.
Phantasmagoria.
What does that word mean?
It basically means like a sequence of imaginary or real images, like as if you're watching a dream.
Yeah, like an example of that is it's Akash Mahal. What? Hava Mahal. Yeah, Hava Mahal. So what does Hava Mahal mean in Hindi?
Hava means air.
And Mahal?
Mahal is
So it's saying there's a palace in the sky. Now, if you look for a palace in the sky, are you going to find one? No, it doesn't exist. So that's called a phantasmagoria in English, or in Hindi it's Hava Mahal, right? Or there's another word for it in English. It's called will of the wisp. Look that word up, will of the wisp. See, you're going to learn a lot of English in the class, you know, or Hinglish also. Will of the wisp. You see it? What's it mean?
It's will o' the wisp is an atmospheric ghost light seen by travelers at night, especially over bogs, swamps, or marshes.
So it's something you see that is actually an illusion.
Yeah. In literature, will o' the wisp metaphorically refers to a hope or goal that leads one on but is impossible to reach.
Okay. Yeah. So if you look for the Hava Mahal, it's impossible to reach. You'll never find it, right? So there's different ways of saying it now. Now we saw the English equivalents of it, right? Go ahead.
This false ego, which develops by identifying with the temporary material body, engenders false pride, false prestige, illusion, false association, ignorance of the eternal soul, material lust, anger and greed, bewilderment, and the refusal to surrender to the will of God.
Okay, so here's what happens. As soon as you accept the false idea that I am this body and I am the enjoyer, then there's what's called a cascade of falsities that follow. Okay, look that word up, cascade. It's a very good word. It's used a lot in colleges. C-A-S-C-A-D-E, cascade. What's it say?
A succession or a large number or amount of something occurring or arriving in rapid succession.
Right. So as soon as you accept, I am the enjoyer, I am the dominator, and basically I am God. All these other false ideas come in right away. It's almost immediate. They all come in. There's a whole bunch of them. Read your list again.
False pride, false prestige, illusion, false association, ignorance of the eternal soul, material lust, anger and greed, bewilderment, and refusal to surrender to the will of God.
Very good. This is a cascade of falsity that starts from thinking I am the enjoyer, I am the Purusha. Right? That's how dangerous these concepts are. You'll become a prisoner of falsity almost overnight as soon as you accept I am this body, I am the enjoyer. You have to realize the dimension of the falsity that people are under now. And it's not surprising that very few people want to be Krishna conscious, because you have all these false concepts in the mind. And it's very difficult to break them down. It's like it's not just one thing you have to break down. You have to break down each one of those false things. Right? Go ahead.
In such a state, one believes, I am this body and everything related to this body is mine. All of these above-mentioned effects rise due to the primary effect of false ego, thinking oneself the doer of activities. As Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, 3rd chapter, 27th verse, the spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature.
Now, this is a very big point. That means everything we're doing, we're not actually doing it. We're being forced to do it by the laws of material nature, and especially the three modes of material nature. Now, nobody would accept that. They say, what are you talking about? I'm the one that's doing this. No, you're being forced to do it. Like, for example, you eat something. You're forced to go to the toilet, right? There was this, I told you about this before, but maybe you forgot about it. There was this one couple, a man and a woman, that joined our temple, but I wouldn't let them live in the temple, so they had VW truck, Volkswagen truck, and they stayed in the truck in the parking lot of the Berkeley Temple. But they did service, and they were very nice people. But they hardly ate anything. The husband was a fanatic, and because of that, he claimed that he and his wife never passed stool or urine. So, and it was partially true. It was partially true. They did pass a little bit. I mean, but they said we didn't pass any stool or urine, right? So you have to go to Berkeley. If you want to really meet crazy people, you're in the wrong place. I mean, there are crazy people, but you want to meet the real crazies, you have to live in Berkeley, which is called Berkeley, California. You will meet the craziest people in the world that go there. So, but they were nice people, though. They did service. They were always very, you would call reserved and self-control. They were nice people, but they had this crazy idea. So, and then his wife got pregnant. So he swore that his wife is not going to the hospital to give birth to the baby. They would have a natural birth in the VW truck, right? And by the way, they never took a bath also because they never, they ate very little. They didn't pass stool or urine, so they didn't think they had to take a bath. And it didn't smell bad either. I mean, they would wash their clothes, by hand and dry them in the parking lot, but they never really went in to take a bath. Okay, so now the wife is getting pregnant, and then the day came when she was going to have a baby, and he said, we said, well, don't you think you should take her to the hospital? No. She's going to give birth in the VW truck. So the wife suffered, I think, for like 24 hours, finally said, call the ambulance. So we called the ambulance. Ambulance came, rushed her to the hospital, and helped her have birth, right? So from that day on, he switched, right? And he switched because she almost died, and the baby was going to die too. And in the last minute, they were saved. So then she forced her husband, go get a job. So he never worked before. She forced him to get a job. So to get a job, he had to buy a suit and a tie. And after a little while, he just became a normal person, moved out from has a job, takes a bath, passes stool and urine, and doesn't talk nonsense anymore. So that was a very interesting thing to see. And like I say, if you really want to meet crazy people, you have to go to Berkeley, California, and stay there for some time. You'll see the craziest people in the whole United States there. Okay, go ahead.
Srila Prabhupada further explains in the purport how a person in false ego may be easily identified. The person in material consciousness is convinced by false ego that he is the doer of everything. He does not know that the mechanism of the body is produced by material nature, which works under the supervision of the Supreme Lord. The materialistic person has no knowledge that ultimately he is under the control of Krishna. The person in false ego takes all credit for doing everything independently, and that is the symptom of his nescience. He does not know that this gross and subtle body is the creation of material nature under the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and as such, his bodily and mental activities should be engaged in the service of Krishna, in Krishna consciousness. The ignorant man forgets that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is known as Hrishikesha, or the master of the senses of the material body. For due to his long misuse of the senses and sense gratification, he is factually bewildered by the false ego, which makes him forget his eternal relationship with Krishna. Purport of Bhagavad Gita, 3rd chapter, 27th verse. Thus,
Okay, all this is really good information. Go ahead.
Thus this false ego, which effectively makes one forget about his relationship with Krishna, causes the living entity to exist in darkness or illusion. This is explained by Srila Prabhupada in the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam, 7th canto, 7th chapter, 19th to 20th verse. Such an individual exists in darkness when he thinks that he is the material body and that everything in relationship with the material body belongs to him.
So every time he refers to something that's false, he also mentions darkness, you see. So, like for example, it is explained in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam that what we perceive in this world is a perverted image that is a reflection in darkness. Now, for years, I didn't understand what that meant. Now, let me say it again. What we're perceiving, we think we're seeing things, but what we're actually seeing is a perverted reflection of reality that is in the darkness, that is a reflection in darkness. Now, what is a reflection in darkness, right? So, it took me years to figure this out, and I've explained this before. It is, if you're driving at night, and you're driving. You're on the driver's seat. You're driving, and it's very dark outside. But there's a lamp, a street lamp. Let's say on your right-hand side, and you're on the driver's seat on the left-hand side, and a little bit of that light comes into the car. And if you look at in your driver's window on your left-hand side, you'll see a reflection of yourself. That is a reflection in darkness, right? And it looks real. It looks like you're sitting outside the car, right? But you're not, right? That is a reflection in darkness. That's actually what we're seeing. We're not seeing real things in this world. We're seeing things that are perverted also. It's like upside down, and it's reflected in darkness. Right? Now, Plato's, it's called the allegory of the cave. Look that up. Plato's allegory of the cave. Plato, allegory, Allegory, of the cave. You got it?
Yes, Marge. I actually have my homework from before.
Okay.
So I can explain. The allegory of the cave, also known as Plato's cave, was a concept used by the philosopher Plato to discuss the negative effects of education on nature.
Whoa, the negative effects of education on?
Nature.
On nature. Whoa, see? 2,500 years ago, Plato's talking about the negative effects of education. Right, go ahead.
In its proper context, it was primarily used as a device to explain what it is like being a philosopher and trying to explain things to the layman. So there's a picture of the cave, and basically it shows a bunch of prisoners which are facing away from the door of the cave.
They have their back to the
cave wall.
In the entrance to the cave.
Yeah, and so
and
they
they're
cannot,
down lower.
Yes,
Yeah.
so they have no access to walk out of the cave.
Actually, they're tied to chairs.
Yeah, they're shackled to the
Facing
chairs.
the wall.
Yes.
Facing the wall. Okay.
And so the light that's coming through the door of
Entrance
the
of the
cave,
cave.
it projects onto the wall that they are facing.
Right.
And there are people on top of the wall that
It's
they're
like
sitting
it's
on.
like a stage above the people that are tied to a chair
Yeah.
facing the wall, right?
And they
And
basically...
these people are behind them up on the
yes.
stage, right?
So they cannot see the real people, but they can only see the shadows of the people on the projection of the light, which is in front of them. So because they're shackled, they're basically sitting there for their entire life.
This is all they see. They never see the real people. They never see the real light. All they see is a shadow of people, and they're jumping up and down and moving around, and that's all they see. That's the only reality they see.
Exactly. So after being stuck in the cave for the entirety of their lives, the prisoners associate all knowledge with the shadows on the wall.
Yeah.
For example, they think that what is actually the shadow of a dog is really a dog. So now the allegory comes alive when one of the prisoners is unshackled.
One of the prisoners escapes, goes
Yeah.
out of the cave, and sees the sunlight.
Yes. So the philosopher shows the prisoner, once he goes outside of the cave, the real perfect forms of the world. So in the real world, he shows the perfect bird, the perfect man, the perfect tree, etc. But the prisoner, who was accustomed to the shadows on the wall for his whole life, could not believe his eyes and actually preferred to go back and get shackled in the cave again.
You see, this is the dilemma. This is the dilemma that we're all in. Now, the prisoner that got out, he went and saw, the reality of the physical world. But that is also a shadow of reality, right? So you have different degrees of shadows of reality. You have to go back to the spiritual world to see the real thing. But see, Plato and his guru Socrates had it wrong. They thought the spiritual world is static, and there's perfect forms in the spiritual world, and every form we see here is an imperfect representation of it, of the perfect form. So they didn't understand what's going on in the spiritual world. But at least they had an idea of the falsity of education. And the idea that people think they're actually seeing reality, but they're not really seeing reality. They're just seeing facsimiles of reality that are they're described as objects that are upside down reflections in darkness. This is serious stuff, and after time, some people actually realize this is a fact. I'm not actually seeing reality. In fact, you can look up. There are scientists that believe that everybody is in a state of illusion in this world, and that God is playing a game with us, right? If there is a God. So you can say there are scientists that believe that we're only seeing illusory things. We're not actually seeing reality. Okay, go ahead.
So Prabhupada explains in the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam, 7th canto, 7th chapter, 19 to 20th verse, such an individual exists in darkness when he thinks that he is the material body and that everything in relationship with the material body belongs to him. This is called aham mama, janasi mohoyam aham mameti. This is illusion. One must give up his illusory conception and thus become fully aware of everything. So how can we overcome this illusory conception? False ego can be overcome simply by dovetailing our senses, mind, and intelligence in the service of the Lord. In Bhagavad Gita, 3rd chapter, 42nd verse, the Lord states, "The working senses are superior to dull matter. The mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. And he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence."
But they're teaching today that there's no such thing as a soul. There's just a body. You see how the dangerous this modern education is. Go ahead.
Therefore,
That means a person will never be free of the false ego.
Therefore, one must realize that any activity performed at the soul level, meaning any activity performed in one's true constitutional position, effectively uplifts one to Krishna consciousness. Therefore, when we use our senses for
Prabhupada
serving
says,
Krishna,
if you accept that you have an eternal soul, then you can accept that Krishna is the eternal Supreme Personality of Godhead. If you accept that you have an eternal soul, then you can understand also that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Go ahead.
Therefore, when we use our senses for serving Krishna, which is our eternal duty as a soul, our activities become purified, and the duality of material versus spiritual nature is no longer present. One begins to use their material facilities to serve the Lord as well. In this way, one slowly overcomes the root of false ego, lust. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, 3rd chapter, 43rd verse, thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind, and intelligence, O mighty armed Arjuna, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, Krishna consciousness, and thus, by spiritual strength, conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust.
Yes, see, now, it's good that you ended up on lust, because there was a lady that I knew, a lady from, she was from Fiji, and she lived in Linwood. So she would invite me every once in a while to come and do puja in her house. And she had a daughter who was in high school. She was a nice girl, nice. And that lady was divorced, and she would invite other friends, Fijian friends, whenever I would come. And she was an expert in making what you call carrot achar. She made really good carrot achar. Right? So anyway, one day she called me up, and she was very upset, and she was crying, and she said, "My daughter is dead." I said, "What?" She said, her daughter was in high school, right? She was like, I think, 15 years old. And I said, "She's dead." I said, "What happened?" She said, "Well, she got mixed up with this one boy, and then she realized it was a mistake, and she tried to separate herself from this boy, and he got really upset and killed her." I said, "What?" I said, you're only 15 years old. But, that doesn't mean anything nowadays. Kids start dating and when they're 12, sometimes when they're 10, right? And also getting engaged in illicit activities when they're just becoming, let's say, a little bit of an adult, like 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. They're already engaged in illicit activities. So she was murdered by this 16-year-old boy, right? Because she tried to separate herself from him, realizing it was a mistake getting involved with him. And he flipped out and killed her. Now, these are real stories. I'm not making this up, and you can see stories like that in the newspaper today, right? It's happening more frequently than you think, So you got to be really careful to make your decisions in life and not just be a lemming. Look that word out, Leming, a lemming. Okay, what does it mean?
A person who unthinkingly joins a mass movement, especially a headlong rush to destruction.
A long rush to a long rush?
A headlong rush.
Yeah, a headlong. Headlong means you're really determined to rush into that disaster, right? So this is what sleepovers and dating and boyfriend, girlfriend, when you're just still a kid, or basically. I mean, you might have a big body, but you're still a kid, as far as your knowledge goes of the world, and you become a lemming. You just follow all the other lemmings that are jumping off a cliff. See, so a lemming is an animal that if one of the lemmings jumps off a cliff, all the other lemmings follow, right? And so that metaphor of being a lemming means that you go headstrong into some illusory thing, and it usually ends up in destruction, self-destruction. Like starting to smoke marijuana, and then graduating to cocaine, and then graduating to opium and this thing and that thing, and then graduating to death, right? So this is happening a lot. And there was also in the news this one girl who was an A student in college, and then she got into high school. She was an A student in high school, and then she got into college. But she had a secret life. She was a porn star. Her parents didn't know about it, right? And then one day, the parents found out that she was murdered by the guy that was controlling her for doing that porn stuff. So she had a double life. The parents didn't even know about it. Right? These things are happening more than you could even imagine today. It's happening all over this country and in other places too. So unless we learn what it means to have a false ego, we could very easily be tricked into these types of self-destructive behavior but by thinking it's good, by thinking it's fun, by thinking it's everybody else is doing it, why don't I do it too? See? So there was one point I wanted to double back on, where when you mentioned, you can read it again, you mentioned that people think they're doing things, but actually they're being forced to do it by the modes of material nature. You want to reread that again?
Yes, I just need to find it again. Yes, so as Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, their chapter 27th verse, the spirit soul bewildered by the influence of false ego thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature.
Right. So now to get a deeper understanding of what this is saying is you go to the 18th chapter, 14th verse. Adhistanam tata karta karanam cha pritak vidam vividas cha pritak chesta daivam chaivatra panchamam. Okay, so this says that the previous verse 13 says, "O mighty armed Arjuna, according to the Vedanta," that's the Vedanta Sutra, "there are 5 causes for the accomplishment of all action. Now learn of these from me. 1, the place of action, which is the body. 2, the performer, that's the soul. 3, it's either the soul or the false ego." So, but the soul is actually the one that's going to be responsible. 3, the various senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, and the mind. 4, the many different kinds of endeavor. Yeah, smoking marijuana, jumping off a cliff, trying to get a PhD or whatever, right? And ultimately, the supersoul. These are the 5 factors of action. Now, most people, they only consider 3 or 4. Very few people consider number 5 before they act. And that's why so many people make mistakes in life. You have to consider these 5 factors of action before you act to be actually knowledgeable about what you're doing. So, just like, for example, let's say someone says, "Oh, it's so good to smoke marijuana," and it's legal in Washington State. And if you do, then you can join our club. Every Friday night we smoke marijuana, and it's fun. Well, now you have to, before you decide to do that, you should consider 5 factors of every action. Number 1, the body, because that's what's going to experience this action, right? Smoking marijuana. Number 2, it's the performer. That's me. I'm going to smoke it, right? Number 3, the various senses. Well, if I smoke it and I take a big breath, I inhale it, I might choke on it because it's the first time I ever inhaled smoke in my life. You're not smoke is not meant to be inhaled into the lungs. You're supposed to inhale clean air, and then your body can separate the oxygen from the nitrogen, and then that oxygen goes throughout your whole blood system and nourishes every cell. See? But if you're inhaling smoke, that's a toxic thing. It has toxic ingredients in it. It has dust in it, other things. What you should look up right now is look up a lung that's been destroyed by smoking. Look it up. They have pictures of it. So you get an idea what happens to your lungs when you inhale smoke. You see it? What's it look like? Give a description, Prabhuji. You give a description. What's it look like?
Yum.
Yum? Is it yummy?
Hare Krishna. So on the left is a good lung, and then the right is affected by smoking.
The smoking one is black.
It's completely black, burnt up, like charcoal, burnt charcoal.
The lung.
Yeah, the lung.
The healthy one is pink and the
Yeah.
Huh? Grilled, yeah, grilled lung,
Yeah. The healthy one is pinkish with blood flowing and pinkish red.
Right.
And on the right side is.
Oh, here it is. Let's show it to everyone. Just show it to everyone. That's good. That's the. So, okay, raise your hand. Who wants to start smoking after seeing this? This is crazy. You have kids that smoke cigarettes. Okay, have you ever seen any kids in their high school that smoke?
No, but I think they do it in the bathroom.
They do it in the bathroom. How about outside when they're walking away?
No, I don't see.
No? Anybody? No?
They usually hide when
They hide. Wow, they used to smoke openly before. Yeah. Okay. So, you have to take into consideration these 5 things. So now, there's the various senses. Then there are the different kinds of endeavor. And ultimately, there's the super soul or Krishna. So therefore, the real question we have to ask is, does Krishna accept smoking marijuana? Answer, no. So therefore, what should my decision be about all my friends are saying it's wonderful, you'll love it, you'll be part of our group, we'll love you if you smoke marijuana? What should be our answer? What do you think? No, because Krishna won't accept it, see? But most people will not accept the fifth point of consideration. So everything we do, we should ask this question, is it acceptable to Krishna or not? And if it's not, then we should definitely not do it. That should be the ultimate point of reference to any decision we make. Okay, so besides that, we're being forced to act by the modes of material nature. Now you can say, well, it's not my fault that I smoked marijuana. I was forced to do it. That's a false narrative. That's not true. You were not forced to do it. You know, and you chose to do it voluntarily. But you are forced to go to the bathroom after you eat. You are forced to take rest and sleep, and then you're forced to wake up and then work again or be engaged in activity. You're forced to get old. You're forced to get sick. You're forced to die. You're forced to be born again, and you're forced into different bodies. And there's so many things that we're forced to do, right? But there are some things that we choose to do. So that's where we get into trouble if we don't consider Krishna as the ultimate criterion for our decision to do or not to do. Okay, so we'll stop right there. Thank you very much. So you had your, okay, so you can read it, you can read it next week, okay, because it's running a little. Well, anyway, can you read it quickly? Yeah.
Take the ones.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
So I will read that I found some references from Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th canto, 24th chapter. Where does the false ego come from? Just reading the translation. The one absolute truth, that's Krishna, remaining free from material dualities and inaccessible to ordinary speech, mind, divided himself into two categories, the material nature and the living entities who are trying to enjoy the manifestations of the nature. So, when material nature was agitated by my glance, the three material modes, goodness, passion, ignorance, became manifest to fulfill the pending desires of the conditioned souls. From these modes arose the primeval sutra, along with the Mahat Tattva.
The primeval what?
Primeval sutra.
Sutra?
Yeah.
What is the primeval sutra?
I looked for the meaning. It is also considered as a Mahat Tattva.
Okay.
By the transformation of the Mahat Tattva was generated the false ego, Ahankara, the cause of living entities' bewilderment. So from false ego, which is the cause of physical sensation, the senses and the mind encompasses both spirit and matter. So the false ego encompasses both spirit and matter.
Not encompasses. Encompasses.
Encompasses both spirit and matter, and manifests in three varieties, in the mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance. And then from false ego, in the mode of ignorance, came the subtle physical perceptions, from which the gross elements were generated. From false ego, in the mode of passion, came the senses. From false ego, in the mode of goodness, arose the 11 demigods. and the other content other devotees covered. But this is very detailed on the 11th canto,
Okay,
24th
I'll
chapter.
speak about that next week.
Mm.
Because that is a little complicated. Yeah. Okay.
One mention, Maharaj, so the false ego itself, the element of us. So sometimes it's very, after reading this, I felt, how do you even get rid of false ego? Because even demigods are also coming from
the way you get rid of it is associating with devotees and engaging with them in devotional service. That's the way you'll get rid of it.
Okay. Because even the demigods, they were born because of the false ego in the mode of goodness.
No, all of us, everybody has a false ego, okay? But it's not impossible to purify it. But it's through association with good devotees and engaging in devotional service, and above all, chanting Hare Krishna. It is possible.
And Maharaj, is it like, at least humans, most of us are in the false ego in the mode of ignorance, we just have to climb up. False ego in the mode of passion, false ego in the mode of goodness, then we can transcend the false ego. Is that how we should see it?
You're going to gradually become free of the false ego through, and this is explained, 14th chapter, 26th verse. Mam chayo vibicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunam samatitya itan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. So you should remember this verse, and it says that one who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman, where you're liberated from the influence of the modes of material nature. Okay? So unflinching or unfailing full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances. That means no vacation, no Disneyland, no Las Vegas, no Yosemite Park, no going to Bungra in the Bellevue Bar, right? Unfailing in all circumstances. So then you'll purify the false ego. Haribo. All glories to Prabhupada ki jai. So now we'll have, if no more questions, we'll have Guru Puja. So, very good, Shrestha.
Maharaj, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. We were talking about in class if the false ideas and we were talking in class if the false ideas enter the mind and the feeling that you are God enters it, instead of breaking all the fake false ideas, why can't you just break the feeling that you're God, because that's what started it?
Well, see, I'm following you now. That's why we're teaching our devotees who is Krishna. So your homework for next week is to explain the qualities of Krishna, such as Sadashvarya, and also the 8 types of transcendental qualities of the Lord, and the 8 types of what you would call spiritual qualities of the Lord. So we're teaching who is Krishna so that you can accept Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead and become free from the false ego. So now the answer to your question is, do your homework next week so you can understand who Krishna is and what are his transcendental qualities so you can accept him as the Supreme Personality Godhead and not think that you are the Supreme Personality Godhead. Okay? That's why it's important to do homework. Okay, so now we'll have Guru Puja. Are you going to do your homework for next week? Okay.
I think I am because I'm a kid.
Here. Oh.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma
Bandhamui Savadhana Mate Bandhamui Savadhana Mate Bandhamui Savadhana Mate
Bandhamui Savadhana Mate
Jahara Prasade Bhar E Bhavatori Aja
Jahara Prasade Bhar E Bhavatori Aja
Krishna Prapti Hoy Jaha Hoite Krishna Prapti Hoy Jaha Hoite Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Koriya Kya Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Koriya Kya Arana Kori Ho Mane Asha
Arana
Arana Kori Ho Mane Asha
Arana Koriya Mane
चक्षुदान दिलो जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से ओ चक्षुदान दिलो जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से दिव्य ज्ञान दे प्रकाशित
प्रेम भक्ति जाते अविद्या विनाश जाते ओ प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाश जाते वेद गाए जहर चरित ओ प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाश जाते भक्ति जहाँ होते ओ प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाश जाते वेद गाए जहर चरित श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु अधम जनर बंधु ओ श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु अधम जनर बंधु लोकेना लोकेर जीवना ओ शिला प्रभुपाद पतित पावना जय गुरुदेव लोइनो शरणा ओ हा प्रभु करो दया दे हो मोरे पद छया ओ हा प्रभु करो दया दे हो मोरे पद छया हे विकास घुषु त्रिभुवना जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा शिल प्रभुपदा जय जय शिल प्रभुपाद प्रभुपाद जय जय प्रभुपाद जय जय गुरुदेव 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 जय जय गुरुदेव नाम विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी निति नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादिशतारिणे नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादिशतारिणे नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौर भक्तवृंद श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौर भक्तवृंद जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौर भक्तवृंद श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौर भक्तवृंद जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौर भक्तवृंद श्री कृष्ण हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे हरे Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari
Jaya Vishnupad Paramahansa Pararajikachasta Tarasatva Sri Srimad His Divine Grace Sri Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vindakiji, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Kiji, Prem Sikaho, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Dvaita Gadadhar, Shri Vasudeva Gaur Bhakta Vindakiji, Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Samkunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhani Kiji, Shri Vrindavan Dham Kiji, Shri Mayapura Dham Kiji, Shri Jagannath Puri Dham Kiji, Tulasi Devi Kiji, Bhakti Devi Kiji, Gangamaya Kiji, Jamuna Maya Kiji, Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Kiji, Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Patita Pavana Kiji. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutta Smat Mata Swarta Namaste Saraswati Devi The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain the pure devotions. I bow down to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet is a perfection that fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him, ecstatic Brahma emanates. By him, ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master of ocean, mercy, friend of the poor, and Lord and master. O Master, be merciful unto us. Give us the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread throughout all the